You just unmute it.
I'm unmuted now. Yeah. Okay. I'll just talk. I'll introduce myself for a second, whilst all the kind of people who have much more expertise than I do in all things technological work things out of the back. Hi, it's great to be with you. My name's Dave. As Tony said already, I'm one of the leaders in Life Church in Southampton. It's great to be down in Weymouth. I think the last time I was down in this neck of the woods was almost exactly a year ago. We were down here on holiday with me, my wife, and our two kids. We've got identical twin girls named Charlotte and Olivia, who are both 5. That scenario is exactly as cute in your head as is in reality, by the way. If you think, oh, that sounds adorable, they are adorable. It is also exactly as exhausting as you might expect it to be. So it's great to be here with you and away from them. I joke. But we're going to be continuing this series that you guys have been going through, thinking about what it means for anybody who's a Christian, anybody who's considering Christianity, anybody, in a way, actually we'll get into this morning, anybody who lives, to be somebody who's journeying, to be somebody who is going through a place, and by nature of being somebody who's travelling, who is journeying, who is moving, is surrounded by people who they feel like they have much in common with, but they don't necessarily belong to in their entirety. And we're going to do that through the lens of the book of 1 Peter and 1 Peter chapter 3. I'm going to read verses 13 to 17 of 1 Peter chapter 3 in a moment. If you've got your own Bible or your own app and you want to follow along, 1 Peter chapter 3 verses 13 to 17. But I'm going to read it if you don't have one in front of you, so don't worry about that. Here's what Peter says in that 3rd chapter of his first letter. Now, who is there to harm you if you are zealous for what is good? But even if you should suffer for righteousness' sake, you will be blessed. Have no fear of them, nor be troubled. But in your hearts, honour Christ the Lord as holy, always being prepared to make a defence to anyone who asks you for the reason for the hope that is in you. Yet, do it with gentleness and respect, having a good conscience, so that when you are slandered, those who revile your good behaviour in Christ may be put to shame. For it is better to suffer for doing good, if that should be God's will, than for doing evil. It might have struck you that it's strange, the first sentence that Peter said there. First thing he says, what can go wrong if you do what is right? Now, who is there to harm you if you are zealous? Or you could say that zealous kind of means eagerly desire, or you're passionate about doing what's good. Who's going to harm you? Well, it should strike you that that's a slightly naive question. Lots of people could harm you for doing what's good. And that happens in very everyday scenarios. Think of the young parent who wakes up one morning utterly exhausted with their little baby, and their house is a complete tip because of how hectic everything has been. And all that young parent wants to do that morning is go out, sit in a coffee shop with their child and switch off from all the domestic chores and everything that's going on around them. And yet, just that simple, perfectly good thing that they want to do, they're afraid. They're afraid that if their little baby starts crying or starts acting up, that they'll get looks or comments or side eyes from other people. Just wanting to do something that's perfectly good, and yet there's a fear of other people making it difficult for them. Or think of the teenager who gets to that point in their schooling where they start to have the opportunity to choose what subjects they're going to study at school. And they know what they're good at and what they're passionate at and what they want to do, but they also know that what all of their friends are going to do are different subjects. And so simply by having the desire to do what is something that's perfectly good, to study subjects that they would be good at, they know that they might be the one who is the odd one out, who faces the mocking words and the teasing and whatever else comes with it. You can want to do things that are perfectly normal, perfectly good, and you might have to fear what other people would say or do because you do them. But despite that, what I think most of us would agree is that acting out of that kind of fear of what other people would say about you is rubbish. Think of that phrase, I was afraid of what other people might think. That's never the answer to a positive question, is it? How is it that you have had such a successful career and you just seemed to have managed to navigate your professional life so well in so many different areas? Well, actually, I was just constantly afraid of what other people might think of me, and that just governed all my decisions. No, that's never the response. Or, you've done such a wonderful job of raising children. You seem to be just such a naturally gifted parent, and your children are such a great reflection on you. How have you done that? Well, actually, every step of the way in parenting, I was just doing everything I did because I was afraid of what other people would think about me when I was doing it. Or you seem to just handle the responsibilities of life so competently and so confidently. How do you do that? I'm just constantly in fear of what other people are going to say of me. No, that's not how we think of acting out of fear. Acting out of fear is always what we say, is always something that happens when things have gone badly. What were you thinking? I was actually kind of afraid of what people were going to say about me. Or what were you doing? I did it because I was afraid of what other people were going to say. But for all that acting out of fear is almost always a negative thing. What is also almost always negative is not acting out of fear. For which I think there is no greater modern example than the temptation we have to not go to the dentist. Why would we choose to not go to the dentist? Because of the fear of the physical pain or the financial pain that might inflict on us. But by not acting out of that fear, what inevitably almost always happens is that we still have to go to the dentist later on, and it is more expensive and more painful than it would have been in the first place. So acting out of fear is rubbish, and not acting out of fear is rubbish. What on earth is Peter talking about when he says, who is there to harm you if you're going to do what's good? Well, Peter reveals in the very next verse that he knows that's what we're all thinking. Verse 14 and 15, he says, but even if you should suffer for righteousness' sake, he knows, even if you should suffer for righteousness' sake, you will be blessed. Have no fear of them, nor be troubled, but in your hearts honour Christ the Lord as holy. See, I think in those two verses, Peter taps into something really deep, really universal for all of us about the kind of human experience. And the first is that we all like the idea of doing what is right, even though it comes with a cost. Doing what is right, even though it comes with a cost, has something cinematic about it. In fact, I really do mean that, cinematic about it. Think of what your favourite movie all time is. Now, in a room this big, there will be a whole load of a really incredible diversity of movies coming to people's minds right now. Now, can you think of somebody in that film who does what is right even though it is costly? And I bet almost everybody, thinking of all of the different movies that we're thinking about, can think of somebody who does what is right even though it is costly. It is because that idea, that motif, it is cinematic. But we all dislike the experience of doing what is right, even though it comes at a cost. In the moment, we find ourselves going, it should not be like this. And in actual fact, it goes beyond just us. We dislike the world where doing what is right comes with a cost to people. We find ourselves going, the world shouldn't be like this, not just for me, but for other people as well. But nonetheless, Peter says, if you do what is right, even if you should suffer for righteousness' sake, you will be blessed, he says. So, how do you find the inner strength? How do you find the conviction? How do you find it in yourself to do what is right, whether it's the grandest of things or the most mundane of things, even though it might cost you? Well, he says, have no fear of them, other people. Don't be afraid of people. And instead, in your hearts, honour Christ the Lord as holy. don't fear people, and do worship God. And that is a weird thing to do. That is an alien thing to do. That is the kind of thing that a stranger who is on a journey through a place where they don't entirely belong would do. You see, this is because this is the second deep thing that Peter is tapping into in these two verses. The first deep thing was that we all like the idea that doing what is right comes at a cost. We all find that idea cinematic. But here, the second thing is that all of our actions flow out of our hearts. Everything you do is actually a reflection of what's going on in the very deepest recesses of your soul. You see, if we think about those things that we do or don't do because we're afraid of what people might think of us, do you see what that reveals about what's going on in our hearts? It reveals that in our hearts, we care deeply about what other people might think of us. So it actually tells us far more about what's going on in our hearts than about the particular behaviour that we're thinking about. Not going to the dentist tells us far more about our internal fear of the dentist than it does tell us about how long it takes you to walk to get to the dentist. Our behaviour comes out of our heart. And so, Peter is offering us here, the Bible, Jesus is offering us here, a different way to live. A way to have believed something that is so transformative all the way to the deepest recesses of your soul that it will change the way you live. Earlier on in Peter's letter, he says in chapter 1, he says this, that Jesus has caused us to be born again to a living hope through the resurrection of Jesus Christ from the dead, to an inheritance that is imperishable, undefiled, and unfading. That what everybody has available to them in the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus is an inheritance that is imperishable, undefiled, and unfailing. That anyone, whatever background you're from, however well-versed you are in Christianity or however new to Christianity everything might feel, you have access to an inheritance that is imperishable, undefiled, and unfading. And that should be totally transformative because nothing that is offered to you anywhere else in the world offers you an inheritance, offers you anything that is imperishable, undefiled, and unfading. Least of all, perhaps, the approval of other people. You see, the approval of other people can never be imperishable because we all know that the approval of other people comes and goes. It flitters this way and that. The approval of other people can never be undefiled because it will always be mixed with the conflictive motives that human beings always come with. And so if you think that we will be happy if we have the approval of other people, that approval will never be imperishable, it will never be undefiled, and it will never be unfading. It will never have a power to last the way the inheritance that God offers us has a power to last. But what Jesus has offered us in the gospel, in his life, death, and resurrection, offers us something that is imperishable, undefiled, and unfading. That because of what he has done for you and I, that all of the guilt of the sin and shame that we have ever had to bring about upon ourselves, all of that guilt has been taken away by Jesus on the cross. That he bore the weight and the pain of all of it. That he took the punishment and died the death that we deserve to die, even though he had lived the life that we should have lived. And proved that he conquered that death by rising from the dead. And in proving that he had conquered that death and rising from the dead, he offers us that same kind of resurrection life. That same kind of resurrection life that cannot be stolen away from you. That cannot be kind of trampled down. That is imperishable, undefiled, and unfading. And that is so transformative a piece of news that if you take it all the way into the deepest recesses of your soul, if you believe it to the very depths of your heart, it will change you. It will change the way you act. It will change the way you live. Maybe in some subtle ways, maybe in some huge ways. And Peter knows that. Peter knows that. In your hearts, honour Christ the Lord as holy. and that will work its way out in the way in which you live, which might mean that means that you suffer. But if you're suffering for righteousness' sake, you will be blessed. And if you do that, if you live like that, the world will begin to ask you why you're doing it. Which is why he says in verse 15, always be prepared to make a defense to anyone who asks you for a reason for the hope that is in you. Yet do it with gentleness and respect. Be ready to give a reason for your hope. Well, we'll come back to what that means in a minute. And do it, if you're going to offer the reason for the hope that you have, with gentleness and respect. And the reason he can say that, the way that we should articulate the hope that we have with gentleness and respect, the reason he can say that is because fear of people either leads to silence or shouting. The fear of people never leads to gentleness and respect. It either leads to silence because we're too afraid of what people will think of us to say anything, or it leads to shouting because we're too afraid of people disagreeing with us, and so instead of saying what we believe, we shout what we believe. But if you worship God, if in the deepest recesses of your heart you're no longer dependent on the approval of people, then it gives you a voice that can be powerful and gentle at the same time. And the reason that you can know that is because the person writing these words had lived all three of those realities. He had lived the silence and the shouting, and then he'd found his voice. On the night before Jesus died, when Peter was with Jesus and people came to arrest him, he was so fearful of what was going on, so afraid of how circumstances seemed to be spiraling out of control, that he rashly and unpreparedly pulled out a sword, took a swing at one of the people coming to arrest Jesus and cut off their ear, shouting. A matter of hours later, when he was wandering around the place where Jesus was having to give an account of himself before a bunch of officials, Peter 3 times was asked, weren't you associated with this guy Jesus who they're talking to inside? And 3 times he said absolutely nothing. Silence. Peter knew what it was like to fear people and to fear circumstances in a way that was entirely inconsistent with believing that Jesus had offered him an inheritance that was imperishable, undefiled, and unfading. He knew what it looked like and felt like to shout and to be silenced because he'd done it. But if you read on in the story of Peter, you'll find that he found his voice. In Acts chapter 4, Peter gets called before that same group of people who put Jesus on trial when Peter found his silent voice. But this time in Acts chapter 4, what Jesus has done for Peter has transformed Peter. That hope of an inheritance that is imperishable, undefiled, and unfading means that he can stand before those people, and when they ask him why he is doing what he is doing, why he is praying for the healing of people, why he is proclaiming the good news about Jesus, why he is doing what he is doing, Peter is able to give the reason for the hope that he has, and he is able to do it with gentleness and respect. He calmly and confidently says what he believes and who he believes in. Imagine Peter going to bed that night after he's been brought before that kind of trial, and they've asked him why he's doing what he's doing, and they've threatened him, but they've found no reason to punish him any longer, and they've let him walk out. Imagine how he felt going to bed that night, and how it compared with how he felt when his head hit the pillow after he had denied Jesus 3 times and swung a sword. I think he would have known far better, he would have slept far better, knowing that he had acted consistently with the hope that he had of an inheritance that was imperishable, undefiled, and unfading. It's the right thing to do. It was the right thing to do, to live differently from how the world around him lived. And you can take a lot of stick for that. But Peter knew that he believed in his heart what was governing his behaviour. That his heart led to the life he was leading. And that is the life of somebody who is journeying through a world where they don't completely belong. That's the life of somebody who is sojourning, who's an exile. You see, if your greatest hope at the end of the day is in exactly the same thing as the hope of the people in the world around you, you will ultimately be like water off a duck's back. But if you hope in something different, and you begin to act in accordance with it, you will slowly but surely stand out. People will say to you, the way you handle your money is different from how we do. Or the way you deal with criticism isn't the same as the way everybody else deals with criticism. Or the way you celebrate when things are good, it's not the same. The way you deal with disappointment is not the same. The way you use your time, it is different. The way you do what is right, even when it is costly, why do you do that? And it is better to make a stand for doing what is good. And when you do, give the reason for the hope that you have. But do it with gentleness and respect. You do not need to shout, you do not need to be silent. But give a reason for the hope that you have and do it with gentleness and respect. And the fact that Peter says that means two things. Firstly, it means that hope really does have its reasons. The reason that Peter can say that is he knows not for 1 second does he think that this is the hope that you have in Jesus is a fanciful and complex illusion that meets some human psychological needs but isn't really a true story. Peter wouldn't think that for a second. And Christians don't need to think that for a second. You have reasons for the hope that you have. It is not wishful thinking. It is not just a kind of social cohesion desire that brings us together. No, we have a very real reason to believe that Jesus Christ walked this earth, that he died the death that we deserve to die, having lived the life that we ought to have lived, and that he rose from death to offer everybody new life. It is entirely reasonable to believe that. But he also says, be ready to answer those questions, because as well as it meaning that hope has its reasons, it also means that any Christian can know them. And if we know that, we can be a kind of quietly confident community. This verse about kind of be ready to answer with gentleness and respect for people who kind of might have questions for what you believe. It has sometimes been like almost used as the kind of the Christian revision passage that says, hey, but always be ready to give a reason for the hope that you have. Therefore, I hope you've done your homework, guys. I hope you've done your brushing up, not just on your theology, not just on your Bible, but also I hope you've kind of understood contemporary challenges to Christianity. I hope you've worked really hard on articulating them. I hope you've got those kind of answers ready to go. I hope if somebody gives you a quiz about the reliability of the Bible, you know your manuscript evidence straight away. Now, I've committed a great deal of my kind of professional adult life to being able to articulate those kind of questions to people. I do a lot of work with university students and answering those kind of questions. I'm completely committed to the reasonableness of Christianity and the ability for people to get really good answers to their questions. But I don't think that's what this verse is calling us to. It's not calling everybody to have to do loads of Christian revision. No, it's saying being able to give a reason for the hope that you have, and that is something that any Christian can do. Here's what I mean, and we'll finish here. Over the Easter weekend this year, I was helping out on a revision camp for young people, kind of people like 16, 17, 18, revising for their A-levels. But it was at a sailing centre. And so the kids would come on this camp, They would do a bunch of revision during the day, and then in the afternoons they'd go and do water sports activities, and then in the evenings we'd have a kind of meeting and a talk, and I was there doing the talk and stuff. But one of the things that tends to happen when people find out that that's what I spend my Easter weekend doing this year is people go, oh, are you kind of really into your sailing and your water sports then? And my answer is very much no. I was very much brought in to do some talks in the full knowledge that other people there were the experts in the sailing and all that kind of stuff. But by being there for the whole kind of few days of the thing, I did get to join in quite a lot. And I'll kind of throw myself into anything like that. So I spent kind of 4 days windsurfing in the afternoons. Now imagine you were wandering along the beach in Chichester Harbour, which is where we were. And as you were kind of on a late spring day, enjoying the kind of spring sunshine in Chichester Harbour, wandering along the beach, you saw me there on the seashore, up to my kind of mid-shin in water, wearing a wetsuit, and looking pretty soggy actually, and wrestling with this windsurfing board and this windsurfing sail. And you went up to me and go, Dave, what are you doing? And I go, oh, I'm windsurfing. And you said, how does windsurfing work? And I went, well, so if you stand on the board and you hold the sail like this, and you point it that way and you look this way and you put your weight here, then you'll kind of go along. And then if you need to turn, you kind of let the kind of sail go down a little bit, you do this weird shuffly thing, and then you can kind of turn around as well. And then you'd say to me, okay, Dave, can you do that? And I would go, well, if I could do it, I probably wouldn't be standing kind of shin deep in the water at the edge of the sea, whilst everybody else is quite clearly actually windsurfing over there. And then you go, well, how do you know this works? How do you know this is even a thing if you only barely understand it and you're struggling to begin to do it? And I go, oh, well, that's easy. Because look at that guy over there and that girl over there, the ones in the red vests, shooting up and down the coast on their windsurfing boards. I don't know what I'm doing, but I know them. I met them a couple of days ago. And they explained to me how this works. And they invited me to come and join in. And I have absolutely no reason to believe that they are lunatics or liars. And actually, the more I've done this with them, the more they have given me the reason to believe that they know exactly what they're doing and that I'll be able to join in with it as we go along. I've got every reason to believe this works. Always be prepared to give a reason for the hope that you have, and do it with gentleness and respect. And any Christian can tell you, look, I don't know everything. At times I barely understand how this works, and if it comes to practicing it perfectly, I'm definitely not on that level. But any Christian can tell you that I got to know this Jesus guy, the one that the Bible talks about and these other Christians believe in. And you see, when I got to know who he was and what he was like, I was completely unable to walk away from him thinking that guy is a lunatic or a liar. And actually, even more since then believing in him, I have found that believing in him is intellectually satisfying, it's personally fulfilling, and that the other people who believe in him, they make me feel like I belong as well. And that hope, that is perfectly reasonable, and it is offered to anybody. And if you believe it, if you really believe it, if you take that hope that he offers into the deepest recesses of your soul, into the corners of your heart, it offers you a chance to be free of fear, particularly of what other people think of you, in a way that nothing else does. Of not being controlled by fearing other people, because you have an inheritance that is imperishable, undefiled, and unfading, and that nobody can take that away from you. Let me pray for us, and then I'm going to hand over to Tony. Father, we have all known that experience of acting out of fear or not acting out of fear. We've all known those moments of wanting to do something, of believing it is right, but being afraid of what other people might think. Father, help us to believe in you. Help us to believe in Jesus. In the Jesus who faced incredible opposition for doing what he knew was right. Who did what was right all the way to the point of dying on the cross for us, as people mocked and poured scorn on him. Thank you that because of his sacrifice we are blessed in a way that we could never have achieved ourselves. Thank you that Jesus secured for us an inheritance that is imperishable, undefiled, and unfading, that can never be lost. Lord, help that good news of what Jesus has done for us go so deep into the deepest recesses of our soul that we would be freed from fearing the opinions of others. That we would live out of the hope that we have. And when we're asked why we're doing it, we would be able to offer the reason for the hope that we have with gentleness and respect. That we would be able to say that we know Jesus, and once we knew Jesus, we were completely unable to walk away from him thinking that he was a lunatic or a liar, but that we believed in who he was and have found him to be good to us ever since. We love you, Lord. Amen.
Thanks, Dave.